Zhu D. My elder brother is dead, my nephew wants to cut me off, I want to rebel. Zhu Gaoxu. My elder brother has also died. My nephew's throne should have belonged to me, and I will also rebel. Zhu Zhangou. I'm big. Bah. I am the eldest brother, I haven't died yet, but as the legitimate eldest son of Zhu Gaoxu, who is a skilled killer, I feel like I'm not far from death either. Keywords of the novel. My Father Zhu Gaoxu no pop-ups, My Father Zhu Gaoxu complete collection download, My Father Zhu Gaoxu latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Eternal Injustice of Su Yelu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Eternal Injustice of Su Yelu. Zhu Zhangou had a very strange dream, in which he turned into a playboy from the Ming Dynasty, accompanied by a group of henchmen. He walked around every day, fighting cocks, drinking and listening to music, and calling out friends to be friendly and unhappy. However, one day, Zhu Zhangou and a group of fox friends went out of the city to hunt. In order to catch a fox that had been shot by an arrow, he shook off everyone and chased after it one by one. As a result, he stumbled while running wildly. At that moment, the top-quality Dewan horse rolled on the ground, while Zhu Zhangou spun and danced in the air. He couldn't help but see a two-person thick tree ahead, and in the end, his pitiful little head fiercely pierced the trunk of the tree. Ah! Zhu Zhangou let out a scream and woke up in a cold sweat from his dream. Fortunately, it was a dream. Zhu Zhangou muttered to himself with lingering palpitations. At this moment, he felt his chest thumping. In his dream, when he finally collided with a tree, he really thought he was dead. In front of him, it was pitch black. Zhu Zhangou took a few deep breaths before habitually reaching out his right hand to touch the phone placed by the bedside, intending to check the time and also getting up to drain water. However, the phone did not touch it, instead it touched a rough wooden board. Where did the wooden board come from at the bedside? Zhu Zhangou was taken aback for a moment, feeling that something was wrong with the situation. He extended his left hand again, only to touch a wooden board on the left side. Then he realized that there was also a wooden board on top of his head. Although he couldn't see it, he had already outlined the shape of a box in his mind. As Zhu Zhangou explored, he found that the head space of the box was large, while the foot space was small, which caused the box in his mind to deform again and finally outline a familiar shape. Coffin. This discovery greatly alarmed Zhu Zhangou, as he had no memory of when he died. Wait. That dream just now. Zhu Zhangou immediately remembered the last feeling of dying in his dream. Could it be said that it wasn't a dream just now, he really died? Impossible, the one who died in his dream was Zhu Zhangou, the son of Han King Zhu Gaoxu. He knew he shouldn't have read all sorts of Ming Chuan novels before going to bed. Zhu Zhangou comforted himself strongly and said. But now is not the time to think about these things. The most important thing for him now is to get out of the coffin. If the coffin is already nailed to death, he might be buried alive. Thinking of this, Zhu Zhangou was also greatly panicked and hurriedly pushed the lid on top with force. Fortunately, although the lid of the coffin was heavy, it was not nailed to death. It was just that Zhu Zhangou had just woken up and his hands and feet were a bit weak, unable to push it open for a while. At this moment, Zhu Zhangou suddenly noticed that the coffin was moving at a slow speed, but due to the uneven ground, the coffin was shaking one by one. What's going on? The coffin hasn't been nailed yet, so we're going to bury it now. This obviously goes against common sense. Before Zhu Zhangou, who was completely confused, could understand, he suddenly heard waves of noise coming from outside, but through the thick coffin board, his listening was not genuine. So Zhu Zhangou pressed his ear to the coffin and carefully listened to the outside noise. The first thing to hear was a dull drumbeat, followed by the whining of horses, the impact of iron tools, and the shouting of the crowd. At first, I couldn't hear what the outsider was shouting, but as time passed, the shouting became more and more orderly, and the sound also became louder. In the end, the noise converged into a very clear sentence. Revenge for the Crown Prince of Han. Jiangnan is a beautiful land and the imperial prefecture of Jinling. Since Chu Yuanzhang established the capital of Jinling, this millennium-old capital has finally blossomed into a second spring, with urban construction expanding again and a population approaching 1 million. In this era, it can definitely be called the #1 city in the world. However, Jinling City, which used to be bustling and crowded, suddenly faces martial law today. Teams of armored warriors, wielding swords and bows, quickly advanced along the streets and alleys. The sound of armor and weapons colliding became a continuous sound, and the army finally converged like flowing water towards the wide Zhangjiangmen Street. Not a half of the people can be seen on the street, and even the beggars who used to be everywhere seem to have disappeared. Occasionally, some bold people sneak out from the cracks in the door and the walls, their eyes filled with anxiety and unease. The entire city of Jinling was filled with an atmosphere of urgency, and people of all ages remembered the scene more than a decade ago when Zhu Di, who was still the king of Yan, led his troops to Jingnan and entered Jinling City. Some elderly people even think of when Emperor Taizu first rose up in the army. He attacked Jinling City 3 times and eventually took control of Jinling, ruling the world. Does it mean that today's Jinling City will have to change hands again? The Zhanghe Bridge outside Jinyang Gate, under which lies the famous Qinhuai River. However, in the past, the Qinhuai River used to have an ancient charm and 10 miles of joy, with wind swaying and painted boats and rain containing smoke. Today, the river's surface is empty, not to mention painted boats, not even a fishing boat can be seen. Although there was no one on the river, the bridge was filled with people. Troops rushing from all over the city gathered on both sides of Zhanghe Bridge, with the center of the bridge as the boundary, and swords and arrows pointing towards each other. The soldiers on both sides were all equipped with the same armor weapons, except that the soldiers in the south of the bridge tied a white cloth to their helmets, which looked like a white ocean from above. The army formation was filled with killing intent, ready to attack at any time. In contrast, the soldiers on the north side of the bridge appeared to be timid, with the leading soldiers erecting tall shields and adopting a defensive posture. Dida. In the military formation in the south of the bridge, there was a clear sound of horses stepping on the stone slabs. Then, the formation parted on both sides, with one general holding a long spear and one person and one horse slowly approaching the bridge. I saw this general with a muscular figure, a square face, whiskers, and bloodshot eyes. He was wearing a special mountain armor, but was covered in a layer of decadent clothing. The so-called Jean Fai is the heaviest funeral attire among the 5 costumes. Generally, children only wear it when their parents pass away. However, there is a special situation where their eldest son passes away and their parents also wear the Jean Fai attire. For example, when the Crown Prince Zhu Biao passed away, Zhu Yuanzhang wore the Jean Fai attire to court for deliberation. I want to enter the palace, who dares to stop me? The middle-aged man's voice was low, as if suppressing immense pain. This middle-aged man is the famous Han King Zhu Gaoxu, the second son of the Ming Emperor Zhu Di. At the time of Jingnan, Zhu Gaoxu repeatedly made remarkable achievements, especially in the Battle of Dongchang where General Zhang Yu died and Zhu Di was surrounded. It was Zhu Gaoxu who led his cavalry to break into the encirclement and rescue him. It can be said that without Zhu Gaoxu, Zhu Di might have died on the road to Jingnan long ago. The Ming army in the north of the bridge clearly knew Zhu Gaoxu. When they saw His Highness the Han King, who claimed to have the courage of a hegemonic king, many soldiers retreated one after another. The final general who led the troops bravely rode forward and saw that this person was also quite burly. However, compared to Zhu Gaoxu, he was noticeably one size smaller, with an unusually long face and a very unusual appearance. The commander of the army, Su Yelu, pays his respects to His Highness the King of Han. I wonder why the prince came. The name Su Yelu, coupled with his long face, surprisingly carries a sense of joy in such a serious occasion. However, upon hearing this, Zhu Gaoxu's eyebrows turned upside down and he pointed his spear behind him, roaring angrily, "My legitimate eldest son has inexplicably died. What do you think I'm here for?" With Zhu Gaoxu's roar, a carriage slowly drove into the military formation, carrying a heavy coffin. Inside was the body of Zhu Gaoxu's eldest son, Zhu Zhangou. "Prince, calm down. The Crown Prince is sending someone to investigate the death of the Crown Prince. Please forgive me. Check it out, I think he's busy destroying evidence." Before Su Yelu could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Zhu Gaoxu's sharp voice. The entire Ming dynasty knew that Zhu Gaoxu had been coveting the position of Crown Prince Zhu Gaoxi. Last year, due to the delay in welcoming him, Huang Huai, Yang Pu, Jin Wen, and other members of the Crown Prince party were imprisoned by imperial edicts, and Zhu Gaoxi almost became a bare rod commander. This year, Zhu Di went to the grassland again to slaughter Mongolian people for fun. Although Zhu Gaoxi was still in charge of the country, both Chinese and martial arts knew that Zhu Gaoxi's position as the Crown Prince was on the verge of collapse. Even many people are rumoring that after Zhu Di's return from the northern expedition, he will abolish Zhu Gaoqi and appoint Zhu Gaoxu as the Crown Prince. As Zhu Di was about to return, at this critical moment, Zhu Zhangou, the eldest son of Zhu Gaoxu, suddenly died inexplicably. Therefore, Zhu Gaoxu was the first to suspect that it was his elder brother Zhu Gaoqi's black hand. "Prince, be cautious. Although the matter has not been investigated yet, the Crown Prince is likely to have just had an accident, and it is not man-made." "Shut up, my son can't have died in an accident." Before Su Yelu could finish explaining, he was interrupted again by Zhu Gaoxu's sharp voice. "I need to enter the palace now, will you let me or not?" Zhu Gaoxu asked Su Yelu with red eyes. "Where the responsibility lies, we cannot let it go." Su Yelu gritted his teeth and said. "Behind him is the Zhenyang Gate, and behind it is the imperial city. Judging from the situation before him, if Zhu Gaoxu does not allow it, he will definitely kill him. If he allows it, Zhu Di will come back and kill him even more in the future. It's better to be loyal to his duties and leave a way for his children and grandchildren to survive. If not, then go to hell." After Zhu Gaoxu finished speaking, he shot his gun and jumped onto his horse, then shot Su Yelu with a deadly hand. Although there were many archers behind Su Yelu, no one dared to point their bows and arrows at Zhu Gaoxu. After all, this was the emperor's son, who dared to harm him. Su Yelu raised his gun to block, but he didn't dare to fight back at all. His strength was not as strong as Zhu Gaoxu's, and now he was constrained and clumsy on both sides. In just a few rounds, he was already in a state of embarrassment. "Kill!" With a roar from Zhu Gaoxu, the long spear in his hand went out to sea like a poisonous dragon. Su Yelu couldn't dodge and was stabbed into his left rib with a shot, causing him to scream in pain. He could no longer use any strength in his body. Zhu Gaoxu was already full of anger and had nowhere to vent, but now with a successful move, he immediately roared again, pressed the tail of his gun with a fierce force, and unexpectedly lifted Su Yelu in mid-air. Seeing Zhu Gaoxu's extraordinary bravery, the soldiers on both sides of the Qinhuai River were shocked and opened their mouths, causing tens of thousands of troops to become silent. However, at this moment, on the carriage not far behind Zhu Gaoxu, the lid of the coffin containing Zhu Zhangou's body suddenly shook and tilted to the right, falling off with a loud bang. The sound of the coffin lid falling suddenly caught the attention of the soldiers from both armies. Everyone doesn't know what happened. The king of Han just picked Su Ye's donkey, why can't the crown prince's coffin be pressed down? Zhu Zhangou was so dazzled by the intense sunlight outside that he couldn't open his eyes. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, so that his eyes could quickly adapt to the outside sunlight. Finally, Zhu Zhangou finally saw the situation outside clearly, only to find himself surrounded by thousands of soldiers and horses. These soldiers stared blankly at him, some of whom couldn't even hold their weapons and fell to the ground with a bang. What's the situation? Is it because I opened the coffin in the wrong way? Just as Zhu Zhangou was struggling to pick up the lid of the coffin and cover it again, and then opened it again, he finally saw a scene of a fierce man holding a gun in both hands, lifting another general in the air. But whether it's picking someone or being picked, everyone is now staring at him with wide eyes and an incredulous expression on their face. In the end, the warrior who was picked up in mid-air had a reaction. With a look of sadness and indignation, he reached out and pointed at Zhu Zhangou, using all his strength to hate and say, "You. I." Before Su Yelu could finish speaking, suddenly a mouthful of old blood spurted out, staining the blue sky with a touch of blood red. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Li Shimin, of the Ming Dynasty. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Li Shimin, of the Ming Dynasty. The Han Prince's mansion has a vast area, surrounded by towering walls. The specifications of the walls are the same as those of the city walls, and the walls can be used for horse racing and driving. There are elite soldiers stationed year-round. Zhu Zhangou climbed the Qiao Tower on the walls of the mansion, holding on to the railing and gazing out into the distance. I saw Jinling City lying at my feet, rows of houses spread out like fish scales until the end of the sky. The winding Qinhuai River passes through the city, dividing Jinling City in half. Willows and willows lean on the riverbank, and painted boats dot the river surface. Occasionally, a gentle breeze blows, and faint sounds of silk and bamboo and singing can be heard. Jinling City is bustling with nostalgia, and no one seems to remember the confrontation that occurred 3 days ago on the banks of the Qinhuai River. But this is only superficial calmness, and many people are very aware that if the situation is allowed to develop that day, it will definitely evolve into a brutal bloody conflict. Even more serious, it may lead to an internal turmoil in the Ming Dynasty, and the number of people who die as a result may be tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands. In the end, this standoff came to an end due to Zhu Zhangou's resurrection from death, without causing any casualties, except for the unlucky Su Yelu. Su Yelu is unlucky, and I am not much stronger than him. Why don't you be more biased when traveling? It's okay to be the son of Zhu Gaoxu, even the son of Zhao King Zhu Gaoxu. Even if his reputation is a bit bad, at least his life is not in danger. Zhu Zhangou looked regretful and slapped the railing with his palm. For Zhu Gaoxu, Zhu Zhangou is very familiar with him. When Zhu Gaoxu followed Zhu Di in the uprising to pacify the disaster, he made a lot of contributions and even saved Zhu Di's life. For example, during the Battle of Puziku, Zhu Di was caught up in a bitter battle, watching as Xingyong's army was about to surround him heavily. Zhu Di's army was already exhausted, and even Zhu Di himself was unable to fight anymore. At this critical moment, Zhu Gaoxu led his iron cavalry to kill, but his cavalry was not numerous, and there was not much chance of winning against Xingyong's army. So Zhu Di came up with a unique move and patted Zhu Gaoxu's shoulder, saying, "Go ahead, Pikachu. No, go ahead, son. Your elder brother is weak and sickly." This almost explicit statement made Zhu Gaoxu's eyes red with excitement, and he immediately opened up unparalleled, with the gods blocking and killing the Buddha, and the Buddha blocking and killing the gods. In the end, Zhu Gaoxu defeated Xingyong's army with a small number of cavalry, thus capturing the last line of defense north of the Yangtze River and clearing the obstacles for Zhu Di to cross the river and seize Jinling. It can be said that since then, Zhu Gaoxu has always believed that the position of crown prince should be his own, but in the end, Zhu Di reneged on his promise and only granted Zhu Gaoxu the title of King of Han after ascending the throne, appointing his eldest son Zhu Gaoqi as the crown prince. This also led to an extreme imbalance in Zhu Gaoxu's heart, causing him to repeatedly compete with Zhu Gaoqi for the position of crown prince. Zhu Di may have felt guilty, so he repeatedly indulged Zhu Gaoxu. After Zhu Gaoxu's nephew Zhu Zhangou ascended the throne, Zhu Gaoxu finally couldn't hold back his rebellion. But when Zhu Zhangou's army arrived, he surrendered again, and this brain circuit was gone. Originally, Zhu Zhangou had no intention of killing Zhu Gaoxu, and even personally went to visit him who was imprisoned. However, Zhu Gaoxu fell ill and intentionally tripped Zhu Zhangou with his foot. Finally, Zhu Zhangou was angered and ordered someone to cover Zhu Gaoxu with a copper cylinder. However, Zhu Gaoxu was so strong that he almost overturned the top of the cylinder. So Zhu Zhangou simply lit a fire around the copper cylinder and turned Zhu Gaoxu into roast duck. It can be said that in terms of killing, Zhu Gaoxu claims to be second, but no one dares to call him first. Thinking of Zhu Gaoxu's fate, Zhu Zhangou also let out a long sigh. What's even more unfortunate is that he was the legitimate eldest son of Zhu Gaoxu and the crown prince of Han personally conferred by Zhu Di. In other words, the fate of Zhu Zhangou and Zhu Gaoxu has been tightly bound together, with both prosperity and damage. In the future, if Zhu Gaoxu rebels and is killed, Zhu Zhangou will definitely not escape the blow. In fact, in history, Zhu Gaoxu rebelled and was killed, and all of his sons were executed without leaving any. In this regard, Zhu Zhangou was even more ruthless than Zhu Di, but at least Zhu Di did not completely kill Zhu Yunwen's son. How should we evaluate Zhu Gaoxu, this cheap old man? The first little expert to die in history. The first acquaintance of the Ming Dynasty. The top young man. Zhu Zhangou whispered to himself again, whether it was a formal or unofficial historian, he didn't have a good evaluation of Zhu Gaoxu, but he became the other party's son. Of course, Zhu Zhangou himself is not a good person. As the crown prince of Han, Zhu Zhangou used to be arrogant and domineering. Whenever the name Zhu Zhangou is mentioned in the capital, almost everyone fears it like a tiger. If Zhu Gaoxu's reputation is as bad as the wind for 800 miles, then Zhu Zhangou is as bad as the wind for 790.9 miles. The two of them can be said to be half a pound, and so on. The only thing that pleased Zhu Zhangou was that it was now the 13th year of Yongle, which was a shining moment in Zhu Gaoxu's life. Especially last year, due to delayed welcoming, a group of Crown Prince Party members were ordered to be imprisoned, and Zhu Gaoxu became the commander of the light pole. The position of the Crown Prince was also in jeopardy, and Zhu Gaoxu waited for Zhu Di to return and appoint him as the Crown Prince. But Zhu Zhangou knew that when his cheap grandfather returned, he would arrest Zhu Gaoxu and hold him accountable. Not to mention the position of Crown Prince, he would even be deprived of his original military power. Changing Zhu Gaoxu's fate, or even helping him ascend to the throne. Zhu Zhangou had thought about this issue before, but after thinking it over, there was no good solution. After all, he traveled too late, and Zhu Gaoxu was too reckless, finishing everything that was supposed to be done and not. Even now, Zhu Gaoxu still promotes himself everywhere, comparing himself to Tang Taizong Li Shimin, and of course, Crown Prince Zhu Gaoxu is Li Jianqing. From this incident, it can be seen that Zhu Gaoxu has no brain. He actually wants to be Li Shimin, but Zhu Di doesn't want to be Li Yuan, let alone be imprisoned by his son in the palace and play with petty people every day. Forget it, there are still more than 10 years left until his family dies in rebellion. Even if I can't change his fate, I should be able to think of a way to escape myself. If I can't go with Zheng He to the west and grab more women, I will create a nation overseas. Finally, Zhu Zhangou spoke fiercely. Crown Prince, it's time to take medicine. I saw a young servant quickly walking upstairs, delivering the medicine from the tray to Zhu Zhangou with both hands. Looking at the bowl of medicinal soup emitting a strange smell, Zhu Zhangou also frowned, but still took it over. As a traveler, after waking up, Zhu Zhangou felt the darkness in his surroundings, so he could only pretend to have amnesia. Therefore, Zhu Gaoxu invited famous doctors many times, and during this period, he almost never left his mouth with medicine. "Ma'an, what's new in the city lately?" Zhu Zhangou asked the young servant while drinking medicine. Ma'an was Zhu Gaoxu's close aide who had just been transferred to his side. In the past, the people around him had an accident due to poor performance, so they were all replaced by Zhu Gaoxu. If you want to talk about something new, it must be the crown prince who was blessed by a divine being and woke up at a critical moment, thus preventing a major catastrophe in the city. Now, the people in the city are all grateful to the crown prince, and every household has erected longevity tablets for him. It is said that the price of wood in Jinling city has increased by tens of thousands. Can you have a word of truth in your mouth, kid? Zhu Zhangou impatiently interrupted Man. This kid is good at everything, but his words are too nonsensical. He only chooses good things to say, just like the sycophants around the foolish ruler. Even if the country is about to perish, he can still boast about the foolish ruler as the eternal emperor. Well. Although the villain's words may be a bit exaggerated, the fact that you saved the world from water and fire is true. If it weren't for you, the whole city wouldn't know how many people would die. Ma En's face was as thick as a city wall, and he was exposed by Zhu Zhangou in front of him. His face did not show any redness, and he could even continue to blow. Alright, I need to listen to the truth. If I use such nonsense to perfunctory, I'll peel your skin. Zhu Zhangou had no choice but to show the airs of the crown prince of Han. Yes, damn it. Ma En was also clever. After admitting his mistake, he hesitated for a moment before finally speaking up. The crown prince is blessed with great fortune and fortune. Many doctors say that you pretended to die before, which is why the prince caused such a big misunderstanding. However, there are also many people behind your back who are full of strange things. They say. What did you say? Seeing Ma En's hesitant expression, Zhu Zhangou reluctantly asked again. Saying that you, the crown prince, have come back to life from death and don't remember anything, maybe. It was a stroke of evil. Ma En's voice became very light and his head drooped lower in the end. Chasing evil spirits. Who would believe such nonsense? Zhu Zhangou said stiffly, but his smile was a little guilty. To put it a bit harshly, the concept of time travel is that the lonely and wild ghosts of later generations have become possessed by a corpse and come back to life. The person is no longer the same as before, so it can be considered to be a kind of collision with evil to some extent. Yes, the villain is already foolish enough, and I don't believe in such nonsense at all. There must be no more foolish person in the world than the villain. As a qualified lackey, Ma En patted his chest and swore. However, just as Ma En finished speaking, Zhu Gaoxu quickly walked upstairs and shouted loudly at Zhu Zhangou, "Son. Let's take a walk. I'll take you to Qianjie Temple for my father." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Young Master Yao Guangxiao. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Young Master Yao Guangxiao. Qianjie Temple is located on Fengshan Mountain in the south of the city, originally named Delangsiyang Jiqing Temple. This name will definitely become extremely popular in later generations, but unfortunately it was changed by Zhu Yuanzhang and could not be passed down to the world. It is simply a great loss for the world. The Ming Dynasty established the Monk Record Department to manage all the Buddhist temples in the world, and the Monk Record Department is located within the Heavenly Realm Temple. Therefore, the Heavenly Realm Temple is also known as the #1 temple in the world. Dad, don't you also believe that I got into trouble? Zhu Zhangou looked at Zhu Gaoxu with a helpless expression on his face. Not far from them stood a tall temple gate with the 3 characters, Qianjie Temple, written on it. Behind the gate was a continuous array of halls and towers, almost covering the entire Fengshan Mountain. How could it be? Your father and I have killed countless people in my life, and I have never believed in any ghosts or gods. Zhu Gaoxu waved his hand indifferently and said. Why did you bring me here? Zhu Zhangou pointed to the gate of Qianjie Temple. Of course, I brought you here to see young master. Your illness has not improved. Young master is a scholar of nature and is also very proficient in medical skills. He must have a way to treat your illness. After Zhu Gaoxu finished speaking, he pulled Zhu Zhangou into the temple gate and climbed up the mountain path. When Zhu Zhangou heard the words, Shaoshi, his heart was shaken. The most famous monk of the Ming Dynasty, of course, was Zhu Yuanzhang, who rose up in rebellion and established the Ming Dynasty while returning to secular life. But besides Lao Zhu, there is also a very famous monk, who is Guangxiao, a Taoist monk who is in an empty door but ambitious, and actively incites Zhu Di to rebel. In history, Zhu Di was the only one who rebelled as a prince and succeeded. Among them, Guangxiao made great efforts. After Zhu Di ascended the throne, he also placed great importance on Guangxiao and appointed him as the crown prince Shaoshi. Therefore, Shaoshi became a synonym for Guangxiao. Thinking of meeting Guangxiao soon, Zhu Zhangou felt a bit uneasy. It was rumored that this monk was very intelligent and close to demons, and he was not the real Zhu Zhangou. He was really afraid that the other party would see something. Zhika monk led the way, and the father and son walked through numerous halls to a small bamboo forest halfway up the mountain. Wearing winding stone paths, they finally arrived at a seminary. This is Guangxiao's residence. After achieving great success in the Jingnan period, Zhu Di ordered Guangxiao to accumulate hair and return to secular life, and rewarded him with the palace maids in his mansion. However, he refused all of them and usually lived in the Heavenly Realm Temple, overseeing the affairs of the monk record department. Zhu Gaoxu arrived at the seminal chamber, but did not immediately enter. Instead, he looked at the gate of the seminal chamber, with a rare hint of hesitation on his face. "Dad, how is your relationship with young master?" Zhu Zhangou asked curiously. "I used to have a good relationship, and the young master once taught our brothers how to read. When I was a child, I was very mischievous. Your grandfather was so angry that he would always teach me a lesson. Often, the young master would plead for me, but later on, he became the crown prince, the young master." Zhu Gaoxu had a hint of nostalgia in his tone, but when he spoke the last sentence, he deliberately emphasized the tone of the word crown prince and his expression became somewhat unpleasant. Zhu Zhangou immediately understood. It seemed that Guangxiao also supported his uncle Zhu Gaoqi in the matter of establishing a crown prince. No wonder Zhu Gaoxu was unhappy. Immediately after, Zhu Zhangou was moved. For the sake of his illness, Zhu Gaoxu was able to let go of his pride and come to meet his political enemies. This heavy fatherly love gave him a sense of belonging to this era. Zhu Gaoxu was not a sentimental person. He waved his hand to the monk Zhika to step down, then walked towards the Jingxi, and Zhu Zhangou quickly followed suit. The main hall of Jingxi is a Buddhist temple, on which stands the golden body of the Buddha. In front of the temple, an old monk sits cross-legged on a cattail, tapping his hand on a wooden fish and reciting Buddhist scriptures. "Young master, I have come to see you. How have you been lately?" Zhu Gaoxu entered the Buddhist temple with a big smile and bowed loudly to the old monk. The old monk slowly opened his eyes and glanced blankly at Zhu Gaoxu, saying, "Not very good. I've been unable to sleep lately." "Ha! Why is this?" Zhu Gaoxu didn't mind either, he sat directly in front of Guangxiao and asked. Zhu Zhangou followed behind Zhu Gaoxu, while also quietly observing the legendary Prime Minister in black. "I saw Guangxiao dressed in a black monk's robe, with a thin and wrinkled body, 3 strands of white beard under his jaw, and a charitable appearance. However, his triangular eyes made his overall temperament somewhat disharmonious, adding a touch of melancholy. A few days ago, someone was playing military drums in the city, and the sound of the drums has been lingering for the past few days. Of course, Laona couldn't sleep because of the noise." Guangxiao stared deeply at Zhu Gaoxu and said again. "Well. I have a momentary impulse. Young master, you have a large amount, so don't worry about these anymore." It is rare for Zhu Gaoxu to admit his mistake to others. After speaking, he pulled Zhu Zhangou behind him and said, Zhangou injured his head a few days ago and doesn't remember anything. Young master, could you help take a look? Zhu Zhangou pays respects to the young master. Zhu Zhangou hurriedly bowed to Guangxiao. Guangxiao originally had a calm expression, but when he saw Zhu Zhangou, he suddenly looked stunned and waved his hand, saying, the crown prince, come forward, I'll help you check your pulse. Zhu Zhangou leaned forward according to his words, sat cross-legged in front of Guangxiao, and then extended a hand to pass it to the other person. Zhu Gaoxu also nervously stepped forward, standing on the side with a worried face. I saw Guangxiao stretching out his thin right hand and suddenly clasping Zhu Zhangou's pulse. Zhu Zhangou grinned in pain. Although the old monk was thin, the strength in his hands was not small. At the same time, he was also puzzled. Does the old monk use such great strength to feel his pulse? Guangxiao's triangular eyes suddenly widened, and his sharp gaze was like two sharp arrows, staring straight into Zhu Zhangou's eyes. Xiao, sure, why are you looking at me like this? Zhu Zhangou felt uneasy all over when Guangxiao looked at him. Under the sharp gaze of the other party, he felt like he had been stripped naked, as if all his secrets had been exposed. Medical skills emphasize the importance of observing, hearing, and questioning. I'm a poor monk with dim eyes, so of course, I need to be more careful. Guangxiao remained silent for a moment before slowly revealing a smiling face. The strength in his hands finally relaxed as he spoke. Sure, how is my son's health? Can he be cured? Zhu Gaoxu next to him couldn't wait to ask. Guangxiao did not immediately answer, but once again checked his pulse before retracting his hand and saying, the crown prince has a strong pulse and a healthy body, and there is no major problem. Is his body okay? Why can't he remember the past? Zhu Gaoxu frowned and asked. The crown prince suffered from the disease of losing his soul after falling off the horse. There is also a debate among medical experts about the cause of this disease, and there is no consensus, let alone treatment. Guangxiao sighed and said. Zhu Zhangou, standing beside him, nodded secretly upon hearing the words. There is no good treatment for amnesia in later generations, let alone that he is not amnesia at all. What should we do? Zhangou's illness really can't be cured. Zhu Gaoxu immediately asked anxiously. That's not necessarily true. Coincidentally, I have nothing to do lately. Why don't I let the crown prince stay in the temple for a few days, and I'll help him take a look. Maybe I can come up with something. Guangxiao replied with a smile. Living here. Zhu Zhangou had a reluctant expression on his face. He had just become familiar with the environment of the Han Prince's mansion and naturally did not want to live in a strange environment again. Okay, that's settled. Zhu Gaoxu excitedly patted his thigh and immediately slapped the board. As the son of Zhu Di, no one knows Guangxiao's position in his father's heart better than Zhu Gaoxu. Although he believes that the position of crown prince has been taken, he still wants to get Guangxiao's support. Now that Guangxiao wants to leave Zhu Zhangou behind, in Zhu Gaoxu's view, it means that Guangxiao is showing goodwill to himself, and of course he will not refuse. Dad, Zhu Zhangou wanted to fight for himself, but was interrupted by Zhu Gaoxu waving his hand and saying, no need to say more. Zhangou, please follow me closely and obey my orders. Yes. Zhu Zhangou looked aggrieved and said, facing this domineering father, he dare not refuse. Zhu Gaoxu was in a good mood and chatted with Guangxiao for a while before taking his leave. When he left, he didn't forget to remind Zhu Zhangou to follow Guangxiao's side honestly and not leave without their consent. Watching Zhu Gaoxu leave in high spirits, only Guangxiao and Zhu Zhangou remained in the Buddhist temple. Please give orders, young master. Zhu Zhangou politely bowed to Guangxiao again. You don't need to be polite, just sit down and listen to me recite the scriptures. Guangxiao pointed to the nearby futuan, then closed his eyes and began to knock on the wooden fish again to recite scriptures. Zhu Zhangou sat down on the cattail and looked at the entire Buddhist temple with boredom, but the temple was very simple and there was nothing to see except for the Buddha statue. Yao Guangxiao's chanting of the scriptures kept coming, and Zhu Zhangou didn't understand the scriptures, nor did he know whether he was reciting the Diamond Sutra or the Dharma Flower Sutra. Anyway, it couldn't be the Tao Te Ching. At first, Zhu Zhangou was still able to exert himself mentally, but as time passed, he felt Yao Guangxiao's recitation of scriptures like a magical sound entering his ears, and his eyelids became heavier and heavier. In the end, he simply dozed off. However, at this moment, suddenly only a sound of footsteps could be heard from outside, followed by a voice outside the door. "Young master. Time has arrived." Zhu Zhangou suddenly opened his eyes and saw Yao Guangxiao standing up. He glanced at Zhu Zhangou and said, "Come with me." "Where are we going?" Zhu Zhangou asked with a confused expression on his face, as he was not fully awake yet. "Don't ask too much, you'll know when you arrive." Without waiting for Zhu Zhangou to answer, Yao Guangxiao walked towards the door. Zhu Zhangou had no choice but to stand up and follow. I saw a young monk standing outside the door. I saw Yao Guangxiao bowing again, then leading the way ahead, wearing the heavy buildings of the front mountain, and finally arrived at the remote back mountain. New book for recommendation in collection, with one chapter updated every day at noon and one chapter updated at night. Thank you for your support. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Hi monks and relics, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Hi monks and relics. Compared to the bustling front mountain, the back mountain of Tianjia Temple is more secluded. Zhu Zhangou followed Yao Guangxiao to a garden, where there were numerous stone pagodas, and it turned out to be the cemetery of Tianjia Temple. Of course, most of the burials here were prestigious monks, and ordinary monks were not qualified to enter. At the deepest point of Tallinn is a small cliff, where more than 10 monks have gathered. What surprised Zhu Zhangou even more was that there was a stone platform built on the cliff, with 9 layers of firewood piled up on it. An old monk with 12 ring scars on his head was lying flat on the firewood pile, his pale skin tinged with a hint of bluish-black, indicating that he had probably passed away. "Is this to be cremated?" Zhu Zhangou asked in disbelief. In later generations, when two people first met, if they had a chance to chat, it would be very common to go and have a barbecue. Yao Guangxiao was so kind that he would take him to barbecue for fun the first time they met. Not bad, there is senior brother Guangshan on stage. He has been doing good all his life. After the Anqing prefecture flood last year, he encountered a major epidemic. Senior brother Guangshan ran around, raising food and medicine to deliver to the disaster area. He also personally entered the epidemic area to save people. There were countless living people, but due to overwork, he contracted a serious illness and struggled for a year, but still passed away. Yao Guangxiao sighed at the end, his expression also quite sad. It was evident that he had a good relationship with this Guangshan master. Upon hearing these words, Zhu Zhangou also showed great respect. Originally, he had no favorable impression of Buddhism because he knew too many despicable people who used the power of Buddhism to do evil. Of course, where there is evil, there is good. There must also be some virtuous and compassionate monks in Buddhism, and the Guangshan master in front of us is obviously one of them. Senior brother Daoyan. At this moment, more than 10 monks who arrived early approached Yao Guangxiao and saluted him. "No need to be polite, are you all ready?" Yao Guangxiao asked with a heavy tone. "Everything is ready." The middle-aged monk led by him had a very sad expression. Yao Guangxiao nodded before saying to Zhu Zhangou, "Crown Prince, this is Master Guangxi, the abbot of Tianjia Temple, and also the junior brother of senior brother Guangshan. Zhu Zhangou has met Master Guangxi." Zhu Zhangou also politely walked up the path of propriety. It's just unexpected that when the three words, Zhu Zhangou, were spoken, Guangxi and the dozen monks behind him took a step back together. Although they were in an empty door, they had long heard of the infamous reputation of the Han Prince. However, Guangxi quickly realized that he was afraid Zhu Zhangou would be angry. He awkwardly smiled and forced his head forward to salute, saying, "The Crown Prince is the body of 10,000 gold. It is truly an honor for the poor monks and others to come to the small temple today." "Master, you really speak." Zhu Zhangou said speechlessly, "How bad is the reputation of his predecessor, even the monk is afraid of him." "Alright, let's start now, don't miss the hour." Yao Guangxiao interrupted the crowd. Strictly speaking, Yao Guangxiao is not a monk in the Tianjia temple, but rather a monk in the temple. However, his identity is too special, so the entire Tianjia temple is led by him. What senior brother Dao Yan said is that he devoted his entire life to practicing the Bodhisattva precepts, capturing countless virtues and merits. Before his death, he was even inspired by the Buddha and left a last word. After passing away, he will condense the colorful relics, so he must not miss the hour. Guangxi became more and more excited as he spoke, with a slight flush of excitement on his slightly chubby face. Although Tianjia Temple is known as the #1 temple in the world, it was actually built for a short time, less than 100 years. It was burned again during the Hongwu period, and the current Tianjia Temple was ordered to be rebuilt by Zhu Yuanzhang, which is less than 30 years. Therefore, compared to those famous temples and ancient temples that often last for hundreds or even thousands of years, Tianjia Temple clearly lacks cultural heritage. However, if the legendary relics can be burned, Tianjia Temple can be considered truly upright in Buddhism. Master Guangshan once said he wanted to keep the relics. Can such a thing be foreseen? Upon hearing Guangxi's words, Zhu Zhangou couldn't help but ask Yao Guangxiao. Not bad. Just a few days before his passing, senior brother Guangshan dreamed that the Buddha had invested his colorful relics into his chest, which is why he left such a last word. Yao Guangxiao replied very solemnly. As a good friend of Guangshan, Yao Guangxiao deeply understands that the other party has exquisite Buddhist teachings and has accumulated countless virtues through his lifetime of doing good deeds. If he cannot bear the sacrifice, then no one in the world can bear the sacrifice. But I'm afraid we won't be able to burn relics like this. After hesitating for a moment, Zhu Zhangou finally spoke up. As for the so-called Buddha's gift of relics, it may be a hallucination caused by Master Guangshan's illness and confusion in the end. As soon as his words were spoken, they immediately drew the angry gaze of Guangxi and others. If it weren't for the fear of Zhu Zhangou's identity, they would have let the other party know why the robe on the Buddha's body was so red. Crown Prince, speak with caution. Yao Guangxiao also gave Zhu Zhangou a displeased glance, but as an elder, he didn't say anything more. Zhu Zhangou secretly pursed his lips, knowing that he was telling the truth, but unfortunately these people didn't listen, so he had to keep his mouth shut. The time has come, and there is no complicated ceremony for the cremation of Master Guangshan. Guangxi led his people to sit in a circle around the stone platform, and then everyone chanted the scriptures in unison. Then a young monk lit the firewood on the stone platform, and Xiongxiong's flames ignited, surrounding the body of Master Guangshan. The 9-layer firewood looks very thick, but the wood is not very durable to burn. After about half an hour, the firewood has almost burned, and the body inside has also turned into coke. Zhu Zhangou and Yao Guangxiao stood at the top of the wind, but they didn't smell anything unusual. Master Guangxi was impatient and didn't wait for the ashes in the fire to completely extinguish. He personally went to the stone platform and used an iron staff to pry open the ashes, hoping to find the relics from it. When Guangxi dug through the ashes, his eyes were almost wide open, but he still couldn't find the legendary 7-colored relics, only some unburned remains. Although some people in Buddhism use relics as relics, they are not as convincing as real relics. No. How could it not be? Guangxi reluctantly scratched again, muttering with a face as pale as death. Other monks also looked at each other, as the saying goes, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment, and even more serious. If they couldn't find the relics, it might shake some of their beliefs in their hearts. How could it be possible? At this moment, Guangxiao in the audience also looked incredulous, but then he suddenly turned around and stared at Zhu Zhangou with fiery eyes, asking, "Why do you know you can't burn relics? Young master, do you want to hear my explanation, or do you want to see the real relics?" Zhu Zhangou, on the other hand, had an expression that he had already known, and then smiled and asked back to Guangxiao. "What do you mean, now that everyone is burned out, how could there be relics left?" Guangxiao was taken aback and then asked again. "Don't worry about this, anyway I have a way to burn relics. Do you listen or don't you?" Zhu Zhangou asked again with a biased and full expression. "Listen." Guangxiao was truly the first strategist around Zhu Di and made the decision immediately. Zhu Zhangou had long guessed that the other party would agree, so he immediately stepped forward and whispered a few words in Guangxiao's ear. So simple. Guangxiao looked incredulous upon hearing this. "It's just that simple." Zhu Zhangou gave a slight smile. "Okay. Someone. Go to Xiangji kitchen and transport a few carts of charcoal." Guangxiao gritted his teeth and immediately ordered loudly. The young monk who had brought them before immediately agreed and ran away. In no time, several carts of charcoal were pushed to the cliff, and then, under the shocked gaze of Guangxi and others, they all fell onto the stone platform. The ashes on the stone platform were not completely extinguished, and the charcoal was very flammable, so it quickly burned again. The fiery red charcoal piled up together, like a burning tomb. "It's not enough, let someone fan it to the death." Zhu Zhangou once again showed filial piety to Guangxiao nodded. Now he is also treating a dead horse as a living horse doctor, and can only fully trust Zhu Zhangou. With Guangxiao's orders, several monks with large arms and round waists stood at the upper air vent, vigorously fanning the fire with large fans. The flames of the charcoal also turned from red to white, and finally even began to turn blue. "What are you doing, young master?" At this moment, Guangxi and others finally woke up and immediately ran over to ask Guangxiao. "You don't need to ask too much." Guangxiao waved his hand and didn't want to explain. Of course, he couldn't explain clearly. Charcoal burns faster, and Zhu Zhangou is afraid of being unsafe. In the middle, more than 10 carts of charcoal were transported and continued to be added to the fire. The monks who fanned the wind changed for a few rounds, one by one tired and sticking out their tongues, panting heavily. If they continued to fan like this, they would have to follow Master Guangshan to the Western Paradise. Finally, someone brought over the bellows from the kitchen fire, which replaced the monk who fanned the wind. It burned for almost 2 hours until it was getting dark and the fire slowly went out. "Are you sure you can burn the relics?" Guangxiao looked at the gradually extinguished flames and once again asked Zhu Zhangou with unease. "It should be. Okay, right." Zhu Zhangou touched his chin and answered. "Should I? You're not sure yourself." Upon hearing this, Guangxiao's angry triangular eyes widened into a perfect circle. "In theory, there's no problem, but burning relics is also my first time. Of course, I can't guarantee it. But rest assured, as long as I burn it a few more times and summarize my experience, I will definitely burn it one by one in the future. Bastard, relics are the most precious treasures of Buddhism. They must be possessed by a highly virtuous monk. How could they be burned casually?" No matter how well Guangxiao was cultivated, he was angrily scolded at this moment, and then secretly called out guilt. It was pitiful that he had been practicing martial arts for decades, but today he was cursed by Zhu Zhangou's anger. "Young master, please don't curse yet. If you like relics, I will burn as much as you need in the future." Zhu Zhangou was not angry either. After speaking, he took the iron staff from Guangxi beside him and walked up to the stone platform. Guangxiao also wanted to know if the relics had been burned, so he followed closely and climbed onto the stone platform. Guangxi and others looked at each other and all followed suit. At this moment, Zhu Zhangou realized that the sturdy stone platform had already been burned and cracked, which gave him some confidence in his heart. Weighing the iron staff in his hand, Zhu Zhangou used the iron staff to remove the ashes from the fire, revealing the almost burnt stone below. Among the ashes on the stone, there were several small beads shining with colorful lights. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Sage, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5, Sage, Sherry. It's really sherry. 7 colored relics. The legendary 7 colored relics. Buddha's mercy, my heavenly realm temple finally has relics. The monks on the stone platform, including Guangxi, saw the relics in the ashes and shouted one by one, looking crazy. What is the matter with the Buddha's family, even though it is the relic I burned? Only Zhu Zhangou let out a dissatisfied growl. Guangxiao was also very excited when he saw the relics, but when he saw the faint face of Zhu Zhangou beside him, he suddenly couldn't get excited. What's going on with this relic? Maybe you use some kind of magic, right? Guangxiao looked at Zhu Zhangou with suspicion and asked. Do you really want me to say it now? When Zhu Zhangou spoke, he looked at Guangxi and others. These people were now full of relics in their minds, disregarding the fact that the charcoal was still very hot. They were actually using their hands to search for relics inside. Guangxiao looked at the crazy-looking Guangxi and others, hesitated for a moment before nodding and saying, let's go, let's talk back. Guangxiao finished speaking and left the Talon with Zhu Zhangou. Along the way, neither of them spoke, each thinking about their own thoughts. Returning to the Jingxi, Guangxiao and Zhu Zhangou sat opposite each other before speaking up. Tell me, what's going on? The truth is actually very simple. Zhu Zhangou poured a cup of tea on his own and drank it all before continuing. Young master must know how to make iron. If iron ore is placed in a fire, if the fire is too small, the stone will still be a stone. Only when the temperature reaches an extremely high level can the iron in the stone be refined. Are you saying that as long as the fire is strong enough and the temperature is high enough, the relics can be burned? Upon hearing this, Guangxiao looked incredulous. He had imagined countless possibilities on the road just now, but never expected the answer to be so simple. That's right, the so-called relics are actually some things inside the human body. These things not only exist on humans, but also on animals. For example, if you throw a dog into an iron smelting furnace, you can still burn relics. Zhu Zhangou is very certain of the way. The cause of relics is no longer a secret in later generations, and even before the death of a certain eminent monk, he directly stated that he would not leave relics, just for fear of being laughed at. Zhu Zhangou watched a video on Bilibili where someone burned a freshly extracted wisdom tooth with a welding gun, and in the end, a white bead was burned out. It turned out to be very beautiful. Making a few more beads could be strung together into a bracelet to give to his girlfriend. Of course, if he did, he would definitely lose his girlfriend soon. Upon hearing this, Guangxiao felt that his worldview was about to collapse. Sacrifice has always been regarded as a precious treasure by Buddhism, and even a high monk who has lost all his fame hopes to burn it after passing away. Now Zhu Zhangou told him that as long as the temperature is high enough, both pigs and dogs can bake relics. If this were to be spread, the entire Buddhist sect would probably go crazy because of it. Don't tell anyone these words, otherwise even if you are the Crown Prince of Han, you will still cause trouble for yourself. After all, Guangxiao was extraordinary. He took a deep breath and calmed his mood before reminding Zhu Zhangou. Young master, you are my father's elder. As soon as I see young master, I feel very friendly, which is why I tell you the truth. Otherwise, if someone else were to kill me, I wouldn't have said half a word more. Zhu Zhangou smiled and offered a flattery. Since we have arrived at this era, we must fully integrate into it, especially the Han Prince's mansion and the time bomb of Zhu Gaoxu, and Yao Guangxiao in front of us is clearly a worthy target to win over. Yao Guangxiao had no reaction to Zhu Zhangou's flattery, but carefully examined him for a while and said, "The changes on you are so great." This. Zhu Zhangou was about to use words like, "If you don't die in a great disaster, there will always be good fortune," to avoid it, but he saw Yao Guangxiao wave his hand and say again, "All right, I'm a bit tired. You go rest, I've already had someone prepare a place for you to live." This. Yes. Zhu Zhangou felt that Yao Guangxiao's attitude had changed a bit quickly, but he didn't ask many questions, so he could only stand up and bid farewell. Monks with knowledgeable guests outside would arrange his accommodation. Watching Zhu Zhangou leave the Buddhist temple, Yao Guangxiao called out another trusted monk and ordered him to leave. He then closed his eyes, but did not recite the scriptures, but silently pondered something. After an unknown amount of time, a young monk reported outside the door, "Young master, the person you invited has arrived. Please come in." Yao Guangxiao stood up and walked to the door to greet him, indicating that the guest's identity was not ordinary. On the bamboo path outside the door, a thin middle-aged man walked by the moonlight. Middle-aged people have a tall and slender figure, a rectangular face, slender eyebrows and eyes, and 3 strands of long whiskers under their jaws. Although dressed in ordinary clothes, they have a fairy-like demeanor. "Pay my respects to young master. I wonder why young master invited me late at night." The middle-aged man walked up to the door and bowed deeply to Yao Guangxiao. "I have encountered an unimaginable event, and I would like to ask Jingxi for you to explain it for me." Yao Guangxiao's expression was solemn, and after speaking, he pulled the middle-aged man named Jingxi into the Buddhist temple. The two of them sat down as guests, and Yao Guangxiao personally poured the tea channel for each other. "Have you heard about the matter of the Crown Prince of Han? Of course, this incident has caused a lot of trouble in the city recently, and the King of Han almost launched a killing spree as a result. Fortunately, the Crown Prince only pretended to die and woke up in time, which can be considered as immeasurable merit." The middle-aged man stroked his beard and smiled. "It's good to know, but when the Crown Prince woke up, he knew nothing about the previous events, and even didn't know the King of Han. This is very normal. I heard that the Crown Prince was injured from a horse fall, and if he injured his head, he could easily suffer from loss of soul." The middle-aged man interjected. "I thought it was a case of amnesia, but today the King of Han brought the Crown Prince to me and asked me to treat him, but I found out." At this point, Yao Guangxiao suddenly frowned and hesitated, but in the end, he spoke in a deep voice. "I noticed a big change in his face. A big change in appearance." The middle-aged man showed a surprised expression, and after a moment of contemplation, he frowned and said, "I have seen the Crown Prince of Han before. Although I did not specifically meet him, I can still see that he has a short lifespan and childless appearance, and there is no possibility of change. The middle-aged man's surname is Yuan, his name is Zhongche, and Jingxi is his character. His father was the famous first scholar of the Ming Dynasty, Yuan Hong. It is said that Yuan Hong once met hundreds of literati and officials without any mistakes, among which the most famous was his meeting with Yao Guangxiao. At first glance, he saw that Yao Guangxiao was like a sick tiger, and in the future, he would definitely become a general like Liu Bingzhong of the Yuan dynasty. Back then, I received a letter from your father as a gift, and over the years, I have also put in a lot of effort in physiognomy. Although I am not as good as your father and son, I can still see Zhu Zhangou's short life and childless appearance. But when I see him today, his face is very contradictory." When Yao Guangxiao finished speaking, his eyebrows furrowed even tighter, and his 2 gray-white eyebrows were almost twisted together. How could facial expressions be contradictory? Upon hearing this, Yuan Zhongche became even more puzzled. As the son of Yuan Hong, Yuan Zhongche's physiognomy was not inferior to his father's, but he had been a physiologist for half his life, and it was still the first time he had heard of a person's face being contradictory. I also find it unbelievable that Zhu Zhangou was originally a person with a short lifespan and no children, but when I saw him today, he had both a short lifespan and a long lifespan. He had both a childless and rare appearance, as well as a multi-child and multi-blessing appearance. It's really puzzling. When Guangxiao spoke, his eyebrows had already furrowed into a knot. He had lived for most of his life, and even when he advised Zhu Di to rebel, he had never been so conflicted as he is now. This is impossible. The so-called appearance is actually an expression of one's fate. How could a person have two completely opposite destinies? This completely doesn't make sense. Yuan Zhongche also frowned at this point. He did not doubt Guangxiao's physiognomy. It should be noted that Guangxiao and his father Yuan Hong were close friends, and his father even taught him physiognomy. Those who could surpass Guangxiao in the world were left with only him after his father's death. At that time, I couldn't believe it either, but soon I thought of some rumors in the city that the crown prince would come back to life after death, and his personality would change greatly after waking up, possibly due to a collision with evil spirits. Chasing evil spirits. Young master, do you also believe in such ghosts and gods? Yuan Zhongche laughed dumbfounded at the words. You, a fortune teller, ask me if this monk believes in ghosts and gods. Guangxiao recognized the teasing tone in the other person's words and immediately responded with anger. Other monks will definitely believe it, but you may not be sure. Yuan Zhongche laughed and said again. From his father's perspective, he is the younger generation of Guangxiao, but he shares a similar temperament with Guangxiao and they are also considered close friends, so they are also very casual when speaking. I'm not joking anymore. At that time, I really suspected that Zhu Zhangou might have been possessed by some ghosts and monsters. Coincidentally, senior brother Guangshan in the temple was cremated, so I took him over, thinking that even if there were any demons and monsters, the prototype would still be revealed in front of the golden body of the great virtuous monk. Master Guangshan. Didn't he say during his lifetime that he would leave behind the 7 Kai's relics? I wonder if he could burn them out. Upon hearing the name of Master Guangshan, Yuan Zhongche immediately asked with great interest. This. Guangxiao lowered his head and hesitated, but in the end, he still looked up and smiled bitterly. I didn't originally burn the relics, but due to Zhu Zhangou's reminder, I finally burned the colorful relics, but I couldn't be happy no matter what. As Guangxiao spoke, he explained the causes of the relics explained by Zhu Zhangou. Originally, this matter was related to the face of Buddhism, and he didn't want to tell anyone, but now he needs Yuan Zhongche's help to clarify his doubts, so he can only tell the truth truthfully, and he believes that Yuan Zhongche knows the importance and will definitely not speak recklessly. After listening carefully, Yuan Zhongche was lost in thought. After a while, he finally asked Guangxiao, do you believe what the crown prince said? Half believing and half doubting, but it's not difficult to verify. I have instructed someone to find some bones of cattle and sheep to burn, and there will be results soon. As soon as Guangxiao finished speaking, he saw the person sent out earlier walking in quickly, whispering a few words in his ear, and handing him an iron box with both hands. After hearing this, Guangxiao sat down in a daze. After a while, he finally smiled bitterly at Yuan Zhongche and said, the result came out, it's in this box. Yuan Zhongche had already guessed the answer from Guangxiao's expression, but he still took the iron box and gently opened it, only to see a layer of shining relics inside. Yuan Zhongche reached out to touch these relics and found that there was still residual warmth on them. In the end, he suddenly looked up and said, I want to personally meet His Highness the Crown Prince. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. People with long faces tend to live longer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. People with long faces tend to live longer. Zhu Zhangou was assigned to the side room behind the seminary, but he didn't sleep well that night. It was mainly because he chose a bed. He had just adapted to the bed in the royal mansion before, but now he needs to readjust. After tossing and turning until midnight, Zhu Zhangou barely fell asleep. When he woke up in the morning, his mind was still a bit drowsy, and he only felt better after a brief wash. Dong dong dong, someone knocked on the door outside, and Zhu Zhangou opened it. A young monk stood outside with a food box in hand. "Breakfast is ready," young master instructed, "please come over after breakfast." The young monk bowed to Zhu Zhangou and said, "His name is Hui Hai. He is usually responsible for taking care of Yao Guangxiao's food, drink, and daily life. Yesterday, he also arranged accommodation for Zhu Zhangou." "Thank you." Zhu Zhangou yawned and invited the other party in. Hui Hai takes out the food from the food box. The breakfast is very simple, a bowl of thick congee, a plate of vegetables and a plate of tofu. Eating these again. Zhu Zhangou couldn't help but frown when he saw the breakfast without any oil or water. He remembered that was all he had last night. The young master has specially instructed that your 3 meals should be according to his standards, so you can eat whatever the young master eats. Hui Hai apologized with a smile. "Just give this to the young master, no wonder he's so thin." Zhu Zhangou grumbled in dissatisfaction. These days, he has been indulging in delicacies in the royal mansion every day, with 8 beautiful maids serving him during meals. He doesn't need to do anything at all, just move his mouth, and even if he wants, he doesn't even need to move his own mouth. Of course, as a socialist successor with ideology, culture, morality, and discipline, Zhu Zhangou couldn't stand this decadent lifestyle of feudal aristocracy the most. However, in order to defeat the enemy, one must first understand them, so Zhu Zhangou decided to delve into it with a critical mindset. By waiting until the next life to travel back, one can more profoundly expose the ugly faces of feudal aristocrats to the world. In the Jingxi Buddhist hall, Yao Guangxiao picked up boiling water from the stove and poured it into a teacup. The clumps of tea leaves in the cup slowly spread out in the boiling water, with a faint tea fragrance in the misty steam. Across from the tea table, Yuan Zhongqi lowered his head and pondered. Yesterday, he wanted to see Zhu Zhangou, but it was too late at the time, so he stayed overnight here. "Young master, the more I think about it, the more I wonder. Since the crown prince has lost his soul, how did he know that the relics were made by high-temperature firing?" Yuan Zhongqi suddenly raised his head and asked Yao Guangxiao. "I can't figure it out either. Additionally, I noticed a significant change in his personality before and after. If it weren't for the same long face, I'm afraid I would have doubted if he had changed someone else." Yao Guangxiao shook his head. "That's strange. Is it really a case of hitting evil spirits?" Yuan Zhongqi stroked his beard in confusion and muttered to himself. "I carefully thought about it last night and found that whether or not to hit evil spirits is not really important. What's important is what impact Zhu Zhangou's personality change will have on the current situation." Yao Guangxiao brought a cup of tea to Yuan Zhongqi and took a sip himself. The identity of the Crown Prince of Han is indeed very special, and he also dotes on this son very much. However, he is only 15 years old. Even if the changes are significant, it is unlikely to have a significant impact on the situation, right? Yuan Zhongqi thought for a moment before answering. The former Crown Prince of Han was just a playboy, not worth mentioning, but now the Crown Prince is intelligent, eloquent, knowledgeable and talented, and even I feel no worse than the Holy Son. Yao Guangxiao also showed a solemn expression in the end. The so called Holy Son refers to Zhu Zhangou, the son of Crown Prince Zhu Gaoxu, who later became Emperor Xuanzong of the Ming Dynasty. When Zhu Di was still hesitating whether to rebel, he suddenly dreamed one day that his father, Zhu Yuanzhang, would give him a large gui. The next day, Zhu Zhangou was born, which finally strengthened Zhu Di's determination to rebel. Zhu Zhangou was intelligent and eager to learn from a young age, and he was deeply loved by Zhu Di. He brought him to his side and personally raised him. Whether it was patrolling Beijing or sending troops to the north, Zhu Zhangou followed him around. Even Zhu Gaoxu was able to be appointed as the crown prince because of Jie Jin's good grandson, which made Zhu Di make up his mind. Of course, Jie Jin also offended Zhu Gaoxu because of this sentence and died tragically in the imperial edict. Just burning the relics does not necessarily mean that the crown prince is knowledgeable and talented. Perhaps he accidentally learned about this. Yuan Zhongche does not agree with Yao Guangxiao's judgment. No, yesterday I was observing the crown prince's words and actions. Although it wasn't long, I could feel that the secret of the relics seemed insignificant to him. There must be more secrets in him. Before Yao Guangxiao could finish speaking, suddenly a monk walked in quickly and whispered a few words in his ear. Yao Guangxiao's face changed and he immediately ordered, "Bring it in quickly." The monk agreed and quickly walked out. Yuan Zhongche was curious in his heart, but he knew that Yao Guangxiao had many political affairs and some things were inconvenient for outsiders to know, so he also wanted to get up and avoid them. However, Yao Guangxiao stopped Yuan Zhongche and said, "Jingxi, you don't need to avoid it. I'll need your help later." Upon hearing this, Yuan Zhongche sat down again, feeling even more curious. Quickly, there was a chaotic sound of footsteps outside, followed by several soldiers carrying a soft sedan chair in. On the sedan chair lay a burly man with an unusually long face and a very strange appearance. When Yuan Zhongche saw the visitor, he also widened his eyes in surprise and said, "Commander Su. He didn't actually die." The person who came was Su Yelu. A few days ago, the two armies faced off, causing a storm in the city. Everyone knew that Su Yelu had been shot by Zhu Gaoxu, so Yuan Zhongche thought he had already died. Not dead, but probably not far from death. Yao Guangxiao sighed and interjected, then stepped forward and personally felt the pulse for Su Yelu. At this moment, Yuan Zhongche realized that Su Yelu's face was flushed, his lips turned white, his breathing was very heavy, and he seemed to have a high fever. His eyes were tightly closed and he fell into a coma, with a strong smell of medicine and blood on his body. Yao Guangxiao gave Su Yelu a pulse, and then lifted the blanket on his body. A medicinal smell with a hint of putrid smell immediately emanated. Yuan Zhongche only then saw a terrifying wound under Su Yelu's armpit. Although medicine was applied to the wound, it had turned black all around, with occasional black and purple pus and blood flowing out. Wound swelling and sores are a near death. Yuan Zhongche also sighed when he saw Su Yelu's injury. The so-called ulcer actually refers to wound infections in later generations. In this era, there were no anti-inflammatory drugs and poor hygiene conditions, so the mortality rate of wound infections was extremely high. For example, after a war, most soldiers did not die on the battlefield, but died from infections after being injured. Speaking of which, the crown prince saved his life, otherwise he would have died at the hands of the Han King that day. Yao Guangxiao carefully examined the wound before frowning. "Why do you say that?" Yuan Zhongche was puzzled. The king of Han had a habit of spinning his spear once it pierced an enemy, causing minor injuries to turn into serious ones and resulting in death on the spot. However, Su's wounds showed no signs of turning, indicating that the crown prince had woken up and the king of Han had not had time to spin his spear. Yao Guangxiao pointed to the wound and explained that he had watched Zhu Gaoxu grow up, and of course, he was very familiar with his habits. But even so, Commander Su is still critically injured. Yuan Zhongche sighed again. Although he had no friendship with Su Yelu, they were both elderly people from the Yan prince's mansion and were very familiar with each other. Unexpectedly, Su Yelu did not die on the battlefield of Jingnan, but died under the command of the Han King. Yeah, the crown prince sent the best imperial physician to treat Su's command, and there was no problem with the medication. However, the wound was still swollen and the high fever did not subside. The crown prince then sent the person to the temple, but I have no good way to deal with it. I can only do my best and obey the fate. At this moment, Yao Guangxiao also shook his head and ordered someone to fetch a silver knife. He then cut open Su Yelu's wound, released the pus and blood inside, and gouged out the carrion inside. The excruciating pain caused by meat picking made Su Yelu moan a few times and slowly open his eyes. Xiao Shi, Yuan. Yuan Sichen, am I still alive? Su Yelu looked at Guangxiao with lifeless eyes for a while before recognizing them. Don't worry, I have cleaned your wound thoroughly. As long as you apply the medicine again, it won't be long before you recover. Guangxiao smiled and told a white lie. Upon hearing Guangxiao's answer, Su Yelu's expression lit up, and his eyes lit up a bit. Later, Su Yelu looked at Yuan Zhongche next to him and took a few breaths before saying again, Yuan Sichen, I heard that people with long faces tend to live longer. Is that true? Yuan Zhongche was speechless in his heart. If he had a long face and lived a long life, wouldn't donkeys and horses have boundless lives? Of course, in the current situation, Yuan Zhongche can only go against his professional ethics and say, this is very reasonable. If you have a long face, you will have a longer life, and naturally you will have a longer lifespan. Moreover, I believe that Su, the commander, is not a person with a short lifespan. As long as you survive this great difficulty, you will have good fortune. Upon hearing even Yuan Zhongche say the same, Su Yelu's eyes lit up even brighter. In his heart, which had already developed a sense of impending death, there was also a hint of survival. Quickly, Guangxiao cleaned up the wound, and Su Yelu was sweating all over in pain. After applying the wound medicine, Su Yelu finally felt temporarily relieved and fell asleep again in a daze. I have done my best, and now it depends on the will of heaven. Guangxiao wiped his sweat and then looked at Yuan Zhongche, as if seeking his opinion. Yuan Zhongche sighed and said, my father once met with the old generals of the Yan prince's mansion, and most of them died under the sword. Su commander was no exception. To be honest, he was able to survive Jingnan, and my father was surprised. Yuan Zhongche glanced at Su Yelu, who was unconscious, and then continued, but this time Commander Su is probably doomed. His face is filled with lifeless energy, and even if the Luo Jingxian comes, he is probably powerless. The King of Han is too agitated. Commander Su is your Majesty's confidant, leading the troops in the capital and safeguarding the safety of the imperial city. If he dies now, your Majesty will surely be furious. In recent years, the King of Han has offended too many people. If the wall falls and everyone pushes, I'm afraid. Guangxiao suddenly stopped at the end because he heard footsteps coming from outside, and then Zhu Zhangou walked in from outside. New books for recommendation and collection. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Garlic with Wine, Part 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Garlic with Wine, Part 1, Zhu Zhangou walked into the Buddhist temple, and when he saw Su Yelu on the hospital bed, he was also taken aback. Then, with a puzzled expression, he said, why does this person look a bit familiar? Zhu Zhangou suddenly patted his head and said, I remember. Isn't he the unlucky Suyi donkey who is still alive? It's alive, but not much stronger than dead people. Guangxiao looked at Zhu Zhangou's complex gaze and said that Su Yelu had come to this end, which can be said to be all thanks to him. Zhu Zhangou understood the meaning in Guangxiao's eyes and exclaimed in his heart that he was wronged. This was all a mess left by the previous Zhu Zhangou, and what was it about him? Cough, is Commander Su seriously injured? Zhu Zhangou stepped forward and asked, since he inherited the identity of the Crown Prince of Han, some of the mess is destined to be irreparable. The wound is swollen, with a high fever that does not subside. Most of the time, the patient is unconscious, and coupled with a chaotic pulse pattern, it is likely to be more ominous. Guangxiao seemed to feel that what he had just said was a bit heavy, so he restrained his emotions and replied again. Let me take a look. Zhu Zhangou lifted the blanket on Su Yelu's body as he spoke, and was also startled when he saw the wound with a large hole gouged out. Who gave these messy medicines and infected the wound like this? Zhu Zhangou saw a large amount of medicinal powder applied to the wound, which had covered it all. He immediately frowned and said, "This is the medicine I just gave him." Guangxiao replied angrily. "Ah, it turns out to be Xiao Shi's medicine. I said that Commander Su has suffered such a serious injury, why is his face still rosy? It must be Xiao Shi's medicine at work. That's burned." Guangxiao threw his sleeve in a fit of filial piety. If it weren't for his old age, he would really want to beat up this kid hard. This. Zhu Zhangou is a bit out of words, unable to figure out how to turn his words around for a moment. "Young master, calm down. The Crown Prince also cares about Commander Su's injuries." At this moment, Yuan Zhongche on the side finally stepped forward and spoke up. Yes, my Crown Prince is indeed kind-hearted." Zhu Zhangou saw someone speaking for him and immediately descended the donkey from the slope. However, he then looked at Yuan Zhongche with confusion and asked, "Are you?" "I, Shanbao Minister Yuan Zhongche, pay my respects to His Highness the Crown Prince." Yuan Zhongche officially bowed to Zhu Zhangou. "So it's Yuan Xicheng. Are you accompanying Commander Su?" Zhu Zhangou also had a good impression of Yuan Zhongche, so he smiled and asked again. "That's not true. I came to visit young master and happened to meet Commander Su seeking medical treatment. We were old acquaintances back then, but I didn't expect him to have to take a step first." Yuan Zhongche sighed at the end and looked at Su Yelu, who was unconscious again. "That's not necessarily true. Although Commander Su's injury is severe, it's not without medicine." Zhu Zhangou smiled and shook his head, saying, "What do you mean, do you have a way to treat his injury?" Before Yuan Zhongche could answer, Guangxiao beside him couldn't help but ask first. "The solution is, you don't have the medicine I need here." Zhu Zhangou said again with a confident mind. "I have all kinds of medicines here, such as ginseng from North Korea, Panax noto ginseng from Yunnan, safflower from Tibet, and so on. As long as you name them, I can come up with them." Guangxiao is very confident. He is skilled in medical skills and likes to collect medicinal herbs. With his identity, almost all medicinal herbs with names are collected. These medicinal herbs are useless to me. I only need 2 herbs, one is strong liquor and the other is garlic." Zhu Zhangou replied with a smile on his face. After hearing this, Guangxiao was also stunned. Not to mention strong liquor, garlic is also one of the 3 meat dishes, which cannot be found in the entire Tianjia temple. What do you need strong alcohol and garlic to treat someone's injury? As soon as he spoke, he was slapped in the face. No matter how good Guangxiao's energy cultivation skills were, he felt a bit embarrassed and angry. Did young master forget about the matter of relics? Zhu Zhangou didn't explain, but asked with a smile. Guangxiao immediately understood his meaning. Previously, it was because he unconditionally believed in Zhu Zhangou that he could burn the relics. Now that he wants to save Su Yelu, he also needs to unconditionally believe in him. "Someone, go outside the temple to purchase spirits and garlic." Guangxiao once again decisively ordered that he should see if Zhu Zhangou could create another miracle. "If you want the strongest wine, the stronger the better. As for garlic, 20 pounds first." Zhu Zhangou added later. The monk in charge agreed and immediately ran away. Spirits and garlic are ordinary things, so about half an hour later, the monk brought them over. A jar of wine, Zhu Zhangou opened the wine seal, and a spicy aroma rushed out. "Not bad, it's distilled spirits." Zhu Zhangou nodded with satisfaction. The era of the emergence of distilled spirits is unknown, some say it was during the Song Dynasty, while others say it was during the Yuan Dynasty. However, in any case, distilled spirits from the Ming Dynasty were already very common. "How are you going to use it? Shouldn't you pour this jar of liquor into Commander Su's stomach?" Guangxiao once again questioned. The previous sacrificial relics were not a problem, but medical skills were one of Yao Guangxiao's strengths. Even he was helpless against Su Yelu's injuries, so he did not believe that the young Zhu Zhangou would have a solution. Do you have a stone mortar for pounding medicine? Bring the largest one over. Zhu Zhangou didn't explain and directly instructed the monk in charge. The deacon monk looked at Yao Guangxiao and only after receiving his consent did he run away and quickly brought in a thick stone mortar. Zhu Zhangou poured all the garlic in without peeling it, and directly pounded it with a stone pestle. Quickly, the entire Buddhist temple was filled with a pungent smell of garlic. Yao Guangxiao secretly exclaimed, "Sin. What is the difference between pounding garlic in the temple and eating meat in front of the Buddha?" In no time, the garlic was mashed into garlic paste. Zhu Zhangou asked the monk in charge to help him pour the garlic paste into the wine jar, and then the two monks carried it and shook it violently for a while. "All right, put down the wine jar." Finally, Zhu Zhangou asked the monk to put down the wine jar and let it sit for a while before finally taking out a glass of strong liquor, which had a strong garlic smell. Smelling it, he refreshed his mind and took a sip, causing the three corpses to jump violently. Zhu Zhangou came to Su Ye's donkey bed with garlic wine in hand. He was about to use the wine to wash his opponent's wound, but suddenly stopped. You. Zhu Zhangou reached out and pointed at the four soldiers with large arms and round waists, all of whom were palace guards. They were previously ordered to bring Su Yelu. "You guys hold down Commander Su, don't let him move around." According to Zhu Zhangou's instructions, the four guards hugged their arms and pressed their thighs, fixing Su Yelu tightly on the bed. After being fully prepared, Zhu Zhangou leaned the cup against Su Yelu's wound and slowly poured it down. Ah! As the garlic wine poured onto the wound, Su Yelu, who was already unconscious, let out a scream and his whole body was tense, almost jumping up. Fortunately, the four sturdy guards held him tightly, and Zhu Zhangou did not stop. Instead, he poured wine and used the small knife he had previously used to remove the medicine from the wound. In fact, this thing was originally not suitable for directly applying to wounds, but in this era, there is no better alternative, so we can only make do with it first. The stimulation of strong liquor and garlic, combined with the scraping of the knife on the tender flesh of the wound, even a beaten man cannot bear it. Although Su Yelu was held down by someone, he still struggled fiercely in pain. The veins on his neck rose high, his face turned red with blood, and his eyes were about to pop out. "Are you going to kill or save people?" Yao Guangxiao couldn't help but ask again when he saw Su Yelu's tragic situation, and even Yuan Zhongche looked at Zhu Zhangou with a skeptical gaze. "Don't worry, young master. This is just a normal reaction, and it won't hurt any more later." Zhu Zhangou returned without lifting his head. "So magical, how could it only hurt for a while and then stop hurting?" Yuan Zhongche couldn't help but ask. "What I mean is, when he passes out of consciousness from the pain, he won't feel the pain anymore." When Zhu Zhangou was speaking, he noticed that there was still some medicine mud deep in the wound that had not been washed clean, so he used a small knife to pick it inside twice. Su Yelu let out a wild howl, and the pain on his body finally exceeded the limit of his brain's perception. The brain's protective mechanism automatically activated, and he fell into a coma again. But Zhu Zhangou still didn't let Su Yelu go. After cleaning the wound, he poured another cup of garlic wine and directly poured it into Su Yelu. Yao Guangxiao and Yuan Zhongche next to him looked straight in the eyes. Is this really saving people? End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Garlic with Wine, Part 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Garlic with Wine, Part 2, a few wisps of green smoke emanated from the incense burner, and the Buddha's gaze in the center of the temple drooped, with an expression of endless compassion. Zhu Zhangou sat opposite Yao Guangxiao and Yuan Zhongche, leisurely sipping fragrant tea, while behind him, Su Yelu lay on the hospital bed, closed his eyes but still hadn't woken up. Are you sure that only strong alcohol and garlic can cure swelling and ulcers? Yao Guangxiao endured for a long time, but finally couldn't resist asking. Young master, do you know what causes swelling and swelling? Zhu Zhangou had known that the other party would ask such a question, but he did not answer, instead he asked in reverse. For those with swelling and ulcers, evil energy can enter the body, and there are internal and external differences, belonging to the category of cold and heat. However, regardless of the situation, it is extremely difficult. Yao Guangxiao replied casually. Upon hearing this, Zhu Zhangou remained noncommittal and asked again, I once heard a story where the Buddha saw a glass of water and said there were over 80,000 insects in it. I wonder if this is true. What you said is a bowl of water in the Buddha's temple contains 84,000 insects. If you don't hold this mantra, it's like eating raw meat. Yao Guangxiao corrected the situation. I see, there are 84,000 insects in a bowl of water. I think these insects are definitely very small, and we usually drink and cook with water, so we must have been infected with these insects. Zhu Zhangou deliberately paused for a moment before looking at Yao Guangxiao and the other two before continuing, I don't know if you have thought about it. What consequences would happen if these insects burrow into a person's wound? Crown Prince, this story should only be taught by the Buddha to be compassionate in everything, and it doesn't mean that these insects really exist, does it? Wu Zhongche questioned. No, the Buddha has great powers and can see things that ordinary people cannot see. If he dares to say such things, he must have seen them with his own eyes. What do you think, young master? Zhu Zhangou first gave Buddha a hand, and then kicked the ball to Yao Guangxiao. Well. What the Crown Prince said makes sense. After all, Yao Guangxiao is a monk. It can't be said that the Buddha did not have such divine powers, can it? These insects don't usually pose any harm, but if a person is injured, they can enter the body and cause various symptoms, such as high fever, cough, coma, etc. If you want to treat an injury or illness, you also need to start with these invisible insects. Zhu Zhangou tried his best to explain in language that could be understood in this era that in later medicine, whether it was bacteria or viruses, they were all treated as insects. Are you saying that in order to treat injuries and illnesses, we need to eliminate these insects that have entered the human body? Although Yao Guangxiao is old, his thoughts are very open and he quickly accepted these new knowledge. This is also related to Yao Guangxiao's experience. When he was young, he was a monk, but he followed Taoist Xingzhen to learn the techniques of yin and yang. Later on, he studied Confucianism, medicine, and law, and possessed the strengths of 100 schools of thought. He was very tolerant of various academic viewpoints. Exactly, there are many types of insects and the symptoms they cause are not the same. For example, General Su's swelling, I would rather call it a wound infection. This is a small bug called bacteria that is causing trouble, and garlic and liquor can both kill this bacteria. In fact, Zhu Zhangou mainly uses allicin, but this thing has a drawback, which is that it is unstable and decomposes when exposed to heat. Its solubility in water is also not high, but it is easily soluble in alcohol and can maintain stability, which is why he used strong liquor. Of course, there is no need for Zhu Zhangou to explain these details. After listening to Zhu Zhangou's explanation, Yao Guangxiao and Yuan Zhongche exchanged a glance. What Zhu Zhangou said can be justified, but it did not dispel the suspicion in their hearts. After all, this is just his own words, and whether it is correct or not depends on the actual effect. However, at this moment, the monk who was taking care of Su Yelu behind him suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Young master, General Su is starting to sweat." Upon hearing this, Yao Guangxiao suddenly stood up and walked towards Su Yelu. He saw that the other person's forehead was covered in sweat. For a person with a high fever, sweating was obviously a good phenomenon, indicating that his body temperature was about to drop. Yao Guangxiao immediately personally inspected Su Yelu and quickly exclaimed with joy, "The high fever has started to subside, with strong breathing and a much smoother pulse." At this point, Yao Guangxiao turned his head to look at Zhu Zhangou and said with a hint of disbelief in his tone, "Your medicine is really effective. It's just a wound infection. Garlic and alcohol are specifically used to treat this disease. With General Su's physical condition, it won't be long before he can recover." Zhu Zhangou returned very easily. In fact, in addition to the good bactericidal effect of allicin, Su Yelu's physical condition is also very important. As the name suggests, he is really as strong as a donkey, which is why Zhu Zhangou dares to make such a fuss. Wait, is this garlic wine effective for all types of swelling and ulcers? Yao Guangxiao suddenly became very excited and rushed to Zhu Zhangou with a few steps, grabbing his arm and asking. Of course, any wound infection can be treated with garlic wine, but it has one drawback. Zhu Zhangou was startled by the excited Yao Guangxiao, but he still replied. What are the drawbacks? Yao Guangxiao suddenly became nervous. Garlic wine has a miraculous effect on wound infections, but there is a prerequisite that it must be freshly made. If left for too long, it will become ineffective. Zhu Zhangou reminded. As an antibiotic, allicin is not as common as penicillin because it has poor stability and decomposes at high temperatures. Even at room temperature, it will slowly oxidize. I see, that's not a big flaw. Yao Guangxiao breathed a sigh of relief. Compared to the effectiveness of garlic wine, this flaw is not worth mentioning. After a while, Su Yelu's burning completely subsided, his breathing remained calm, and his face returned to normal. This made Yao Guangxiao have no doubt about the efficacy of garlic wine. Judging from Su Yelu's appearance, there should be no worries about his life anymore. Young master, Huihai said you have something to ask me for. I don't know why. Zhu Zhangou finally realized his purpose of coming to see Yao Guangxiao, so he asked. Upon hearing this, Yao Guangxiao looked at Yuan Zhongche next to him and saw him nodding slightly. He immediately said, I have guests here today, so why don't you take a stroll around the temple? We'll talk tomorrow if you have anything to do. This. Okay. Zhu Zhangou didn't understand why the other party suddenly drove him away, but on second thought, he didn't want to listen to Yao Guangxiao reciting the scriptures anymore, so he turned around and left. How about, is the crown prince's face very contradictory? Watching Zhu Zhangou leave, Yao Guangxiao immediately waved away the others and asked Yuan Zhongche. It's really contradictory, like two completely different faces blending together, looking very strange. Yuan Zhongche nodded first, then continued. But what surprised me the most was not the appearance of the crown prince. What's more strange than his face? Yao Guangxiao asked in surprise. Young master, why don't you take a look at Commander Su's face first? Yuan Zhongche suddenly sighed and pointed to Su Yelu, who was sleeping soundly on the hospital bed behind him. Yao Guangxiao suddenly remembered that Yuan Zhongche had just said that Su Yelu had a dead face and there was no possibility of survival, but now his injuries have improved, which is obviously very contradictory. So Yao Guangxiao quickly stepped forward and carefully examined Su Yelu's face. It's impossible. In less than an hour, how did his face completely change? Yao Guangxiao exclaimed in surprise. Judging from his physiognomy, Su Yelu was originally a horizontally dead figure with swordsman added to his body. However, now that all the dead figures have disappeared, his fate has undergone endless changes, and his physiognomy cannot tell the depth. Young master also noticed that Commander Su's face had changed greatly. Although there was no sign of sudden death, his future was uncertain, and even I couldn't see his fate in the future. At this point, Yuan Zhongche once again looked towards the direction of Zhu Zhangou's departure outside the door. He can actually change a person's fate. Yao Guangxiao also looked out the door and murmured. Young master, did you pay attention to the appearance of the Han King last time he came? Yuan Zhongche suddenly asked. No, at that time I was attracted by the crown prince's appearance and didn't even pay attention to the Han King. Yao Guangxiao shook his head. If the crown prince can really influence others' destinies, the Han King will definitely be the most affected. I need to find a way to meet the Han King. When Yuan Zhongche mentioned Zhu Gaoxu, he couldn't help but glance at Guangxiao. Both of them had secretly met Zhu Gaoxu, knowing that although he was a prince, he was just like Su Yelu, both of whom were facing death. Now that Zhu Zhangou has changed Su Yelu's fate, the fate of the Han King is likely to be affected. Okay, if you have any results on your end, please let me know. Guangxiao nodded again and said, he wants to see how many people's destinies can be affected by Zhu Zhangou. Yuan Zhongche bid farewell and left, and Guangxiao personally escorted him out. Later, Guangxiao returned to the study on the other side of the Buddhist temple and picked up a brush to ponder for a moment. Only then did he record in detail what happened today, especially regarding the therapeutic effect of garlic wine, which he repeatedly emphasized multiple times. Finally, Guangxiao put the letter paper into an envelope, and then picked up a pen to write the 4 big characters, Your Majesty's personal message, on the envelope. Pop pop. Guangxiao clapped his hands, and after a moment, a gray-clad monk quickly walked into the Buddhist temple. Give this letter to the royal guards and have them deliver it to the north as quickly as possible. Be sure to hand it over to Your Majesty in person, while warning them that this letter concerns the lives of millions of soldiers and must not be lost. Guangxiao gave strict orders. Yes. The gray-clothed monk agreed, took the letter and placed it in a sealed iron box before quickly leaving. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Meeting is fate. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Meeting is fate. The sun was very bright, and Zhu Zhangou crouched in the shade of the tree, watching as the ants under the tree marched in unison, surrounding a large green bug. Although the green insect had an absolute advantage in size, facing the fierce and fearless ant colony, it ultimately harbored resentment and was carried back into the hole by the ants. Watching the green insect gradually disappear into the ant hole, Zhu Zhangou looked up and exhaled, life is really boring. The life in Zhu Zhangou has been very regular these days. In the morning, I went to the Buddhist temple to listen to Guangxiao reciting scriptures, and in the afternoon, I had free activities. As long as I didn't leave the temple, I could go anywhere. At first, Zhu Zhangou was still wandering around, but soon lost its freshness. Today, it was even more boring to see ants fighting. The crown prince has eaten. At this moment, Hui Hai, who was responsible for taking care of Zhu Zhangou's daily life, walked in with a food box in her hand. What's there to eat? It's just vegetables and tofu, it's really appetizing. Zhu Zhangou gave the other party a white glance, while Guangxiao kept his guard. He also had bad luck, with only vegetables and tofu every day. As the young master said, the 5 colors make people blind, the 5 flavors make people happy, and although green vegetables and tofu are plain, they can calm people's hearts, so that they can focus on practicing Buddhism. Hui Hai and Zhu Zhangou became acquainted, knowing that although this crown prince was notorious, he was actually easygoing, so he spoke more frequently. I'm not a monk, what kind of Buddha did I cultivate? Zhu Zhangou grumbled, but still sat at the stone table under the tree. Hui Hai took out his lunch, and it was indeed a combination of vegetables, tofu, and rice. Looking at the meager food, Zhu Zhangou had no appetite and picked up chopsticks to pick and choose among the green vegetables and tofu. In the end, he didn't take a few bites. It's not that Zhu Zhangou is coquettish. In fact, he was also born into a poor child in his past life. Not to mention meat, even eggs can only be eaten on his birthday. Every year during the Chinese New Year, what he looks forward to the most is that dumplings filled with cabbage and pork can be eaten until they are full. It was precisely because Zhu Zhangou was too short of meat when he was a child that he never treated himself unfairly in eating after working. Every meal must have meat, and the heavier the oil and water, the better. He wished he could make up for all the missing meat before. Of course, this also caused his weight to soar at one point, with a weight value almost equal to his height, but it took him a lot of effort to lose it later. As the saying goes, it is easy to go from frugality to luxury, but it is difficult to go from luxury to frugality. For Zhu Zhangou, who is used to eating meat, it is almost unbearable to make him eat vegetarian every day now than to kill him. "I'm full, I'll go take a walk outside." Finally, Zhu Zhangou casually took a few bites of rice, threw down his bowls and chopsticks, stood up, and left. Since he had no appetite, don't force himself. Autumn is coming soon, but the sun is still very poisonous. Fortunately, the vegetation in Tianjie Temple is lush, and Zhu Zhangou Gully only carries the shade of trees. The mountain wind blows, but it is also very cool. The Tianjie Temple covers a vast area, with several main halls in front of it and some monk temples at the back. Some pilgrims worship Buddha and sometimes stay in the temple for 10.5 days. Zhu Zhangou passed through a bamboo forest and suddenly heard the sound of a stream coming from ahead. He was about to go to the stream to wash his face, but suddenly stopped and lifted his head, twitching his nose a few times. "It smells so good. This smell." At this point, Zhu Zhangou's eyes lit up as he smelled the familiar aroma of meat, instantly enticing all his cravings. So he quickly walked forward, looking for the flavor, turned around a clump of bamboo, and a small stream suddenly appeared in front of him. In the pavilion by the stream, a big white fat man sat in front of a stone table, which was filled with a table full of vegetables. Bai Pengzi had just picked up his chopsticks and was about to feast on them when someone suddenly burst in, which left him stunned. The two of them were staring at each other, completely speechless for a moment. "Uncle, while Buddhism is quiet, it's not good for you to eat alone here, isn't it?" Zhu Zhangou stepped into the pavilion and asked with a righteous expression on his face. Faced with Zhu Zhangou's questioning, Bai Pengzi was clearly stunned for a moment, and his gaze towards him also became somewhat strange. However, Bai Pengzi quickly chuckled and said, "What you're saying is, meeting is fate. Why don't you sit down and have a drink with me? How embarrassing is this?" Zhu Zhangou spoke politely, but his buttocks had already sat on the stone bench. "I don't know what to call uncle." As Zhu Zhangou spoke, he was also looking at the other person. He saw this chubby old man in his 30s and 40s, who was about the same age as his father Zhu Gaoxu. His face had too much flesh, squeezing his facial features together. He smiled and his eyes disappeared, looking amiable. "My surname is Huang Mingtai. How do you call me, little brother?" the chubby uncle asked with a smile. "Young man Wang Shi, since uncle's surname is Huang, I'll call you Uncle Huang." Zhu Zhangou casually replied that he was the crown prince, so he took the first two characters and made a fake name. It turned out to be Guangxiao. "The temple is very poor, and I believe you have also suffered a lot. Come, don't be polite." Huang Tai smiled and handed Zhu Zhangou a pair of chopsticks, greeting him. Zhu Zhangou was also very greedy. He pretended to be polite and immediately picked up his chopsticks and stuffed a few pieces of lamb. He took a bite and the meat was so delicious that he almost flew up. "Delicious, this lamb should be the Saibei sheep," Zhu Zhangou praised while eating. "Ha! My little brother has also studied food and suddenly tasted that this is a sheep from the north." Huang Tai looked at Zhu Zhangou in great surprise and asked. "Actually, it's also easy to distinguish. The mutton in the south has a strong smell, which is more lean and less fat, unlike the lamb in the north, which is tender and juicy." Zhu Zhangou smiled again and said, at least in his past life, he was also a foodie. Coupled with the developed logistics in later generations, he has tasted almost all the delicious food from all over the world. This is also true. Different regions have different soil and water resources, and the natural products are also different. For example, the sheep in the north are delicious, but the ducks in Jinling are unique. "Little brother, give it a try." Huang Tai also became interested and pointed to the roast duck on the table as the last thing. Zhu Zhangou had been staring at the roast duck on the table for a long time, after all, it was a signature dish of Jinling. His time traveling was too short to taste it yet. So Zhu Zhangou picked up a piece of duck meat and put it in his mouth. After chewing it a few times, he nodded slightly and said, "The taste is good. Is it okay? This is a duck cooked by the master of the 10-mile tower in the capital." After tasting it, Emperor Taizu praised it and often sent people to buy it from the 10-mile tower. Huang Tai is somewhat dissatisfied with Zhu Zhangou's evaluation, as this roast duck is also his favorite and a must-eat dish for him every day. "Uncle Huang, don't be angry. This roast duck is indeed delicious, with a crispy and fat outer skin that is not greasy, but it has one drawback." Zhu Zhangou calmly said. "What are the drawbacks?" Huang Tai was taken aback for a moment. He had been eating this dish for so many years and had never felt that there were any shortcomings to it. "Don't you think the meat of this roast duck is too old? The highest level of roast duck is crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, but the meat inside this roast duck is too dry and hard, which loses its taste. Zhu Zhangou is a very picky way. Roast duck is roasted in the stove, which inevitably makes the duck meat dry. Little brother, you're just picking bones out of an egg." Huang Tai shook his head and did not agree with Zhu Zhangou's view. "That's not necessarily the case. Cooking methods vary greatly, and there's nothing that can be done without imagination. I have a way to make this roast duck crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The first time two strangers have a meal, they definitely can't eat dry, and chatting about food can obviously bring them closer the fastest. What's the solution?" Huang Tai immediately asked, and judging from his physique, he could guess that the most difficult thing in his life to quit was the desire for food and drink. "It's very simple. When roasting duck, pour water into the duck's belly, sew it tightly, and put it in the stove. Roast outside and cook inside, naturally making it crispy on the outside and tender on the inside." Zhu Zhangou chuckled and said. "This is the practice of Beijing roast duck in later generations, and Beijing roast duck is actually evolved from Jinling roast duck. Amazing." Huang Tai excitedly patted the table, realizing that he had never thought of such a simple solution. Eating someone else's short mouth, Zhu Zhangou saw how much they enjoyed listening to food anecdotes, so he decided to say more. Huang Tai's eyes lit up as he listened, and in the end, he looked at Zhu Zhangou with a hint of confidence. Food was his favorite, but no one had ever been able to chat with him so intimately like Zhu Zhangou. After a meal, the guests were overjoyed, and finally Zhu Zhangou stood up to bid farewell. However, at this moment, Huang Tai stopped Zhu Zhangou and said, "Brother Huang, it's rare for us to have such a close conversation. Why don't I hold a banquet here tomorrow and let's continue drinking and having fun?" "Okay, then we'll see you tomorrow." Without hesitation, Zhu Zhangou agreed and hummed a tune before leaving. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. What a good child. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. What a good child. The boring days finally gained some fun. Every morning, Zhu Zhangou listened to Guangxiao reciting the scriptures, and at noon, he sneaked out to eat haisai with Huang Taihu. Speaking of which, Huang Tai is also a wonderful person. As long as Zhu Zhangou has mentioned the dishes, he can have people make them the next day, and then the two of them can taste them together. When it comes to food, it is inevitable to talk about the customs and traditions of different regions. This once again made Zhu Zhangou realize that although Huang Tai is overweight, he is also a knowledgeable person. The more they talked about Zhao's speculation, the more they felt like they had a forgotten friendship. At noon that day, Zhu Zhangou came to the pavilion by the stream again, but to his surprise, Huang Tai was not there. "Didn't come, did I get scared of eating?" Zhu Zhangou muttered to himself, but from what he saw, Huang Tai should not be a person lacking money, let alone caring about a few meals and drinks. At this moment, Huang Tai hurriedly arrived with two servants from the bamboo path. He was overweight and the weather was hot, so he walked and wiped his sweat, looking very disheveled. little. I apologize for keeping you waiting. Huang Tai came panting and winding to the pavilion to apologize. With just a few steps, he was as if he had just been pulled out of the water. Uncle Huang, you're welcome. I've just arrived too. Zhu Zhangou smiled and invited the other person to sit down. The two servants placed the dishes they brought on the table and retreated outside the pavilion. There were some miscellaneous matters that took up time today, so I'll penalize myself 3 cups first. Huang Tai said he poured himself a glass of wine and was about to drink it. However, Zhu Zhangou suddenly reached out and stopped the other person, saying, Uncle Huang, listen to my advice. We can eat vegetables, but don't drink alcohol. Why is this? Huang Tai was taken aback for a moment. In recent days, they have mainly tasted delicious food, and wine is only a side dish, and he has not consumed much. Uncle Huang, you don't know anything. When you drink alcohol into your stomach, it mainly depends on your liver to resolve it. However, once you gain weight, your liver will definitely have problems, so it's best not to drink it. Zhu Zhangou solemnly reminded him. Huang Tai should weigh no less than 300 pounds by sight. If he gains such weight, it is at least a case of fatty liver and cardiovascular problems. In his case, he should have quit drinking long ago. I didn't expect that you not only know food, but also medical skills. Huang Tai asked in great surprise upon hearing this. I don't really understand, I just read a few miscellaneous books randomly, and I just have some understanding. Zhu Zhangou told a small lie. He had gained weight before and indeed knew a little about it. Upon hearing Zhu Zhangou's words, Huang Tai's expression suddenly became somewhat strange. He stared at Zhu Zhangou for a while before finally sighing but saying nothing. What's wrong, Uncle Huang? Do you have something on your mind? Zhu Zhangou asked curiously. It's not a big deal, just seeing you, I thought of my own son. If only he knew the cold and the hot as you do. Huang Tai hesitated for a moment, but finally spoke with a bitter smile. Uncle Huang, is your son not sensible enough to make you angry? Zhu Zhangou asked curiously again. He is not ignorant, but too sensible, so sensible that it makes me very distressed. Huang Tai smiled bitterly again. What you said, my son is sensible, shouldn't you be happier? Zhu Zhangou is also a bit confused. How could he be sensible and still understand the problem? Being sensible is good. My son has been smart and eager to learn since he was young, and my father also likes him very much. He is much closer to his grandson than to my son, and he always takes care of him in everything he does. Many people even say that the reason why my father chose me to take over the family business is because he sees my son as more outstanding. In comparison, I am just an optional transition. Huang Tai said at the end, his face was full of grief and indignation. He picked up the wine glass and wanted to drink it. But when the wine came to his mouth, he thought of Zhu Zhangou's advice, so he put it down again, and cruelly stuffed a few large pieces of braised pork belly and chewed it. I understand now, it turns out that Uncle Huang, you are jealous of your own son. Zhu Zhangou chuckled and said. I can't talk about jealousy, it's just that I was originally my eldest son and should have inherited that family business. But now, after all, it's all thanks to my son. On the contrary, no one has seen my efforts over the years. Huang Tai once again complained indignantly for himself. Uncle Huang, please be content. Having a sensible son is better than having an ignorant father for me. Zhu Zhangou was also intrigued and could not help roast. Oh. Why doesn't your father understand? Upon hearing Zhu Zhangou's words, Huang Tai immediately became interested and put aside his son's matter. Well. If the son doesn't say anything about the father, I still won't say it. Zhu Zhangou suddenly changed his mind again. In this era, the word filial piety is too great, so sometimes one should also pay attention. Don't worry, if you keep your troubles hidden in your heart, you will definitely suffocate yourself. Although we hit it off, we just met by chance. After leaving the Heavenly Realm Temple, we may never see each other again. So if you have any worries, just let it go. Huang Tai seemed to be very interested in Zhu Zhangou's family affairs, and at this moment, he kept urging. Upon reflection, Zhu Zhangou seemed to make sense. Okay, I've been holding back these words for a long time and can't find anyone to confide in. Zhu Zhangou finally slammed the table and picked up the glass in front of him, drinking it all in one gulp. The situation at home is actually quite cliché. My dad is the second in line and he has always wanted to compete with my uncle for family business. He relies on my grandfather's favor and doesn't do anything out of line in his daily life. Since your grandfather dotes on your father so much, maybe he will really let your father inherit the family business. Unexpectedly, Huang Tai suddenly interjected, with a hint of resentment in his expression. Damn it! My dad is so brave and impulsive. Even if he wants to take away his family business, he should at least be able to win people's hearts. But when he's good, he usually acts recklessly and offends people inside and outside. My grandfather is not stupid, how could he possibly hand over his family business to him? The more Zhu Zhangou spoke, the more angry he became. However, Zhu Gaoxu couldn't understand such a simple matter. Are you just not optimistic about your father? Huang Tai seemed very surprised, with a white and chubby face full of disbelief. It's not that I don't think much of my dad, but the fact is, what worries me the most now is that my grandfather's affection for him is also coming to an end, and our family will probably be in bad luck. Zhu Zhangou sighed again at the end. Zhu Di was about to return to court, and at that time, Zhu Gaoxu would not only be deprived of military power, but also demoted to Shandong. Since that's the case, why don't you advise your father well? Huang Tai leaned over and whispered softly. I would like to advise, but my dad has such a hot temper. Believe it or not, if I dare to advise him, he can beat me up. Zhu Zhangou had a bitter expression on his face and spread out a father like Zhu Gaoxu. Even if he were a traveler, he didn't curse. Huang Tai nodded with a deep understanding when he heard Zhu Zhangou's complaint. Forget it, let's not talk about these anymore, so as not to ruin the mood. Zhu Zhangou suddenly shook his head and brought the topic back to food. Although Huang Tai is somewhat unsatisfied, it is not easy to ask further questions. After finishing his meal, Zhu Zhangou bid farewell and left. Huang Tai watched as Zhu Zhangou's figure disappeared into the depths of the bamboo forest. Finally, he sighed softly and said, "What a good child. Why do you have a father like the second son?" End of this chapter.